Hold on.
Sounds good. Good evening, everybody. This is the first meeting of the Climate Action Committee. So I want to thank all of you for being here on March 21st. We're meeting hybrid tonight, and we have Rachel at least, who is joining us remotely. But we will go around the room. Because this is our first meeting, I think it's important to at least start by saying hello to everybody who's here. So I'll start. I'm Marianne Cooley. I am the vice chair of the select board. And I'm grateful to all of you for saying yes when you then agreed to be appointed. So I'll say thank you for that.
I'm position of the program and the member of the Climate Action Council there.
Artie Crocker, I'm the representative from the Conservation Commission, and I certainly think it's a large responsibility of what we're taking on to start for something. So prepare for the future when we start to work.
You also work in
Yeah, well, yeah, I didn't know it. Yeah, I've also been involved in business, but I mean, it's everyone's concern about what business they're in. Hopefully it's everyone's concern.
I'm Kevin Keene from I'm Nick Hill. I'm a member of the Green Movement Steering Committee, and I also work as a energy management consultant for businesses and colleges and so forth. Work on steering committee application. Stephen Burrell, I also work with Green Movement. Work with Mapworks software for the data, where I also work with their sustainability group, the map workers, the green workers, I should say.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Higgins. I oversee construction operations, sustainability, environmental health and safety at MIT. So long history of sustainability, going back 20 years to the godfather of the lead standard, to climate action plans, and standing up large renewable energy projects all across the place. I'm happy to be here.
I'm Catherine. Oh, sorry, Rachel. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Rachel Bright. In my day job, I work in the life sciences and healthcare industry. And that's an industry that's just really trying to think about doing a lot of this work. And I've lived in Needham about 11 years, and I have 2 boys, and one in 6th and one in 3rd grade. So happy to be part of this group.
I'm Catherine Copley. I work the administrative specialist for the building design and construction department, and I'll be taking the minutes.
It looks like Natasha joined. Do you want to let her introduce herself?
Oh, there she is.
Yeah, I apologize. I couldn't find the invite quickly, but I did. I'm Natasha Spada. I live in Needham, and I'm an architect here, and I'm on the planning board as well. And I used to be on the PPBC, and I'm also on Nuwari. I'm excited to be here. By the way, I'm lead AP BD plus C, and I do a lot of buildings that are net zero and LEED. So I'm aware about the construction piece of it.
I'm Cecilia Simchek. I'm the Director of Finance and Admin for Public Services. So I've worked in public works and worked on the Green Communities Designation Grant. I actually have the giant check in my office right now. I just got it last week. So, and I'm one of the town liaisons.
I'm Pat, Director of the Building Design and Construction Department, and have a long interest in sustainability, dating back to my college thesis, which was a few years ago. Just a few. But most recently have worked on the Sunita Williams Elementary School, and was also the staff liaison for the Solar Energy Exploratory Committee when the RTS solar was installed. And we sent out slideshows on both of those projects. We can go through those if that's helpful, but that's the background information, along with some of the background information from
So we didn't talk about who's kind of running the meeting tonight, but you keep looking at me, so I'll keep going on our agenda if you want me to do that. Tonight really was our baseline to sort of set the stage for where the work was gonna go. And I think from that perspective, it's important to understand sort of what is actually going on in town right now. It will be important for us to understand what the expectation from the state is with where we're going by 2050, what they're trying to ask us to figure out what our plan is to do. And then we are going to need to understand, after we talk through the charge, I think we'll have to eventually start to think about what our sectors are, which are the highest priority for us to be working on. Is there some low-hanging fruit that we're going to take advantage of sooner rather than later? And I think some of that's outlined in the Green Communities work, all right? And then put together a plan of how we will break this down sort of by decade with where our priorities might be for what's known. And I want to recognize there'll be a lot of unknowns. We're not going to be able to get there with the information that we have today, but we can at least figure out where we're starting. One of the things that I just want to sort of put on the table as we're starting, there has been recent discussion about Needham and a municipal aggregation plan, all right, and a request that we do something immediately. We haven't done that because to go to a municipal aggregation plan actually takes bringing the town along. So it's not something that's going to happen over the course of 4 or 6 weeks. All right. That's likely a tool that's in the toolkit for this committee to recommend to the select board and then to put a process in place that we would get on board to do that. I think it's extremely likely that the town will end up going there, but we are not there at this point in this nanosecond. So I just want to say that we will get there. Okay.
Yeah, just kind of going down these, if it's helpful in terms of the existing efforts, we can show those slideshows, or if there's any other information. We are currently in the design for the Emery Grover building. Being a historic renovation, we are looking closely at net zero ready. Getting to net zero would require construction of a solar PV array in the parking lot, which is probably outside our current budget. The town is also exploring a PPA, power purchase agreement with through Power Options with Select Energy for installation on top of the new Jack Cogswell building, which is that new DPW storage building out at the RTS. I should note that the solar PV, the economics of the solar PV that was associated with the landfill project was extremely beneficial to the town. We included at the very end of that, the project is now owned by Tesla. And between its net metering savings, the lease payments and the tax payments, the town on average gains about $750,000 per year. Because of the SREC program and the net metering benefit that our consultant at Greenblatt was able to arrange for the B5 rate, which in essence, whenever if under the B5 rate, your rate increases if you're requesting power during the primary high demand period. By inverting that, we get the highest rate in return when we produce during that same period of time. So that means that when we're producing during the dead of the summer in the middle of high air conditioning season, we might be getting up to 27 cents per kWh produced, and that has enabled us to generate well in excess of $500,000 per year, close to $600,000 per year just in net metering. The town did not retain any of the original environmental benefits. We sold those went with the developer on the property. But as a result, the town's investment was very low. Limited to staff time and consultancy with integrated solutions or net with Beth Greenblatt. Beth also has assisted in the Green Communities application and continues to assist in that evaluation.
And just a quick update on green communities. We got officially designated as a green community in February of 2020, which is why I just got the check last week. And we got about $148,000, much smaller than Pink's numbers, but in funding to do sort of energy efficiency projects. And at the time we had planned to do some HVAC related work. When COVID hit, it got put on the back burner. And then with adjusting all of our systems and all of their school buildings to do 4 air changes per hour, which is much higher than the standard and also not very energy efficient at all, unfortunately. We pivoted and used the money to upgrade LED lights in the Mitchell, the Pollard, and the Newman, which had kind of a twofold effect, particularly at the Mitchell and the Pollard, which are older schools. It also just makes the spaces look nicer with the brighter lighting. And definitely, like, people were very thankful for such a small project, which was kind of cool to see. And now for the next round of funding, we are looking at more HVAC related investments since we've been able to pull back a little on the air changes per hour.
And at the Sunita Williams School, the slideshow that I distributed for that was really put together for the students. So it becomes part of the educational tool for that facility. And the total production on an annual basis is about 40% of the power demand for the school. So it was not sized to take on the full capacity. It was, I won't say it was an afterthought because the roof was fully solar ready, but the PPBC, Permanent Public Building Committee, who we report to, didn't want to commit those funds during the initial bid process. And instead, we put that out as a separate bid and were successful in getting, I think, a very reasonable bid on it. It was installed and ready at the time of the opening of the school. And I suppose if we had designed the building from day one, mechanical equipment might have been somewhat different. But I think that contribution is really quite strong. And in that case, the town owns that asset. It's part of the school. And we expect it to, while it does, it's not great in the wintertime, same as the RTS solar, same as your solar on your house, if you have it, like mine. It is both an educational and a CO2 reduction element within the overall town assets.
Hank, when was that operational?
All of 2018.
So did it get into the S5 through that smart?
It's March. So I didn't bring the full economic calculation, but it is, I'd say, between the energy savings and the net metering. And we get monthly payments on that. The benefit is maybe in the range of $50,000 to $75,000 per year.
And are we tracking the carbon reductions since we own the rents?
We can. It is being tracked. There's a live website that does track it and gives that equivalent. And it's a standard update within that system. We do have to report that as part of the lead. It was a lead silver building. But quite frankly, the other things I'm like, I'm hoping we'll get a few summer interns who can assist in that process.
Cecilia, can I go back for a second to your 4 ACH question? I'm going to take advantage of our meds and heads in the room and say, where are you guys running with air changes per hour? Okay. It's not clear to me where the recommendations are going on that these days for healthy buildings. Any ideas? Do you have any, where are you guys running?
So anywhere from, 1.5 to 14. So we have modelers that really look at number of part, we look at like room by room, like it's a classroom, how many people, how long is the class, how much time is before the class, how much time is after the class, what's the volume of the room, how much outside air. So we have a whole like model we run. And then like it just says, does it elevate the risk or lower the risk? And we try to keep it under a certain probability. So there is no like number that's good. Like the CDC and no agency will say 4 is the number, or 3 is the number, or 2 is the number. But I think it's the, we've been running everything 24/7, as much as you can, as much outside air as you can, 120% of what the capacity of the system is. But now that we know, how the transmission occurs, I think we're at the point where if the room really isn't occupied, it's obvious you don't need to be running it at 3 a.m. So I think it's really coming back to probably by midsummer, end of summer, we would be back to kind of pre-COVID kind of levels in terms of getting our carbon footprint sorted out. But we've had a number of folks look at it and just say, it's time to kind of get back to reality with, our carbon footprint, because it's really, the marginal benefit is not there from the transmission point of view.
May I ask, what type of air exchange method is it? Is it for enacting energy, keeping the energy in the air itself? Is it moisture? Is there different type of air exchange methods? Is there any one particular one as far as air exchange or energy exchange?
What the town did was we upgraded to MERV 13 or better filters in all the schools, even though some of the systems were not designed for that. And initially we were running the systems 24/7. That proved to be very expensive from an energy perspective. I don't know what the town told.
I think maintenance perspective.
And we also retro commissioned every single unit in every single building.
Is there energy exchange going on with the air exchange?
In the newer buildings, there are energy recovery units. But when you're running it above capacity, it's less efficient. And when you're putting in a higher MERV filter, it's less efficient than it was originally designed. We were even putting in, like in the Sunita Williams School, there are multiple filtration areas, and the way it's designed, the MERV 13s are only in the final air filter of what goes into the building. You don't necessarily have to use that same filtration on the exterior air coming in or on return air. It's going to get back into the building. And so we learned a lot about availability of filters that are back thereof, and explored a variety of other techniques like UV lighting, which we chose not to take, whereas there were a few other districts that did, and I think you have those in ORs, but not necessarily in other general office type buildings. And then in terms of air changes per hour, I think well, other than kitchens, we don't have any that are pure exhaust. Kitchen exhaust fans, so just exhaust the air. And I don't know, in labs, you probably have a higher filtration, more.
Yeah,
can-
and it's all 100% outside air. So, you know, you gotta look at how much is 100% outside air versus recirculated air. We've done all the right homework. I mean, it's the filters, it's the outside air, it's the get as much out of the system as you can, retro condition it, make sure it's working. I mean, those are all right.
And open the windows.
And yeah, and open the windows too. But now it's like, you know, we kind of go way over and like, you know, if you're running it 24/7 on weekends, there's no living spaces like, and, you know, I think we can start to throttle it back a little bit.
The town has already started doing that in pretty much all of the buildings at this point. And in most of the buildings, but not those that haven't been renovated, but in most of the buildings, we have building management systems, BMSs, so it can be monitored. We have 2 on-call commissioning firms that have been used during this whole process, and also assist with the commission of every new building that comes online. And we are looking at this building. I should go back to it. This building is the only building in the town inventory that is geothermal. And it's been operating. It was designed to be able to have solar panels on the roof to approach net zero. But we have an awful lot of shade on the roof, so it would probably not be as efficient as we would like it to be. The CAF, the Center at the Heights, and the Rosemary Recreation Center, and also the Memorial Park building are all electric, so they're air change heat exchangers. And the renovated Emory Grover building will be an all electric building as well. So that's why it'll be net zero ready. And in terms of other initiatives, there have been.
So I would just pause for a minute, right? The reason for all the focus on the buildings is from the town's perspective, the buildings are the single biggest energy user. So getting it right there is key to our strategy going forward.
And the 2 largest energy users within town are the high school and the Charles River Pump Station.
Oh, see, Chelsea, when they're Robert would go. No.
It's also off of
It's on Charles River Street.
The
water treatment plant, yeah.
And that's because it's operating for 7. So I think that in terms of looking at the town inventory, I should say also, we did go through a period of time when converting from oil to natural gas was the preferred solution. In terms of efficiency, it also enabled the town to get into higher efficiency boilers and hot water heaters.
We only have 3 buildings now that are on oil. The Emory Grover, the Hillside for the time being, and the Daily building. The Daily building, it's the custodian, it's the trades building that's behind fire station number 2. You could drive by it a million times and never know it's there.
But also Mitchell.
No, Mitchell Line is
You've
no longer on
converted.
oil, yeah. Gassy.
So we took the dual fire boiler burners out of Pollard, moved them to Mitchell, and pumped the gas there. So I guess that's pretty much all of the existing efforts, unless you can think of.
The only other thing I can think of as part of the green communities is some of the vehicle stuff we've done. We've looked at what vehicles we can change to electric and started to kind of investigate that opportunity, wanting to make sure that the new electric, especially some of the trucks are worth it, and giving them a little bit of time in the open market before we jump right in and realize maybe it was a bad choice. And obviously there's a lot of vehicles that just cannot be switched, but looking at installing anti-idling technologies in all of our vehicles, so that way if they are left running, they turn off, and we're trying to save some gas that way.
Did we get anywhere with the hybrid cruisers yet?
No,
Who's one in service?
don't know off the top of my
I
head.
got stuck behind.
I don't buy those. So I don't know.
NYPD has them, I got stuck behind. That was the plan.
Yeah.
One of the last I checked, one of them.
I know our fleet supervisor, John, is very interested in investigating all of that and pushing for that. And he, even though he's only in DPW, he does consult on all of the vehicles purchased in town, so.
And we do see our charge point
Yeah.
stations are still here. We have installed charge point stations downtown in the Chestnut Street lot, and also at the Rosemary Recreation Center. Those that are sitting in the corner, we're still awaiting some work from Eversource to put in transformers, and we'll have two more, total of 4 more charging stations right in front of this building. Hopefully that'll happen in the spring. They come to select board for the right of way, or will be coming through because they need to place a whole transformer and then go underneath the sidewalk, and then they'll bring conduit all the way up to.
Let's just don't dig it before it comes.
Right.
We're really doing a job on builders these days who dig before they have permission.
So I just had a question. So overall, like the existing efforts, there's a lot of work that's been done. Is that been measured sort of against an inventory that like, here's where if you say the town buildings or the largest kind of thing you have control over, and getting that down in terms of emissions, is there like a starting point, baseline year where you were like, here's all the town buildings and here's all the town fleet, here's the emissions, and then like we kind of, made all these great investments, and then here's kind of where we're at today, below some baseline from greenhouse gas emissions, kind of like what the real environmental benefit is.
For green
So-
communities, our baseline years, FY 2018. Again, I just completed the annual report and it was all over the place because of COVID. So a lot of our stuff kind of did not necessarily decrease as much. But a lot of it also did. And you could clearly see that it was a lot of the HVAC related things that were causing it.
So can I ask a question though? Because I think if we look at the state legislation, right, it gives us permission to go back to 2007,
Yeah.
if I'm remembering properly. I don't know what we have from 2007. Certainly by 2007, we'd already renovated some schools and already transitioned from oil to natural gas at that point for Elliott, for Broadmeadow, I guess just for those two really by 2007. But do we have the ability to go back and build an earlier baseline?
So we are working with Metropolitan Area Planning Council and MAPC. And we will be working with them as consultants to help us draft that baseline for greenhouse gases. In fact, Cecilia and I were on a conference call with them, sort of a kickoff, and we're looking to do both the net zero working group within the town departments, but then also coming to this group to go through both the goals and once they have that baseline, to kind of report to this committee what that baseline is, and I think help us target where we're going and look at ways in which to monitor it on a monthly basis. So we haven't quite worked out the logistics with that, but that's the intent in our next meeting.
What kind of a timeline does that work on?
They are looking to go through this with us through the summer. And then check in afterward. So yeah, by the early fall, they would be checking back in with us. They have a MAPAC playbook, apparently. Has any of you worked with them before? So, and then also through the Green Communities, we have the capability of bringing Beth Greenblatt in as a consultant. She has been working with her ever since the solar PV at the RTS, and she's been extremely helpful. In fact, some of these charts in this solar landfill project were ones that she put together, and is also helping to monitor as we move forward, and also monitor as we go forward with Green Communities.
Can you say some more about the net zero working group that you're working for?
Well, looking at the broader agenda that is part of the Climate Action Committee guidance, we're looking not only at energy consumption, but also vulnerability assessment, hazard mitigation plans. So the DPW has gone through a hazard mitigation, but HVA, okay. I haven't been involved in that. The town also is tracking all of their compliance with the NIPD's requirements, so Clean Water, Clean Air Act. What I guess we haven't done is to, other than the work that has been done by the Green Needham Collaborative, is to track that across the residential and the commercial, and where we have been focused mainly on the municipal sectors. But Green Needham Collaborative has certainly, through the Solarized Needham program and other things like that, have been broadcasting that out to the local community. I know that the planning board is looking toward opportunities related to solar canopies that would require a zoning bylaw change. And then also how that might play out in future planning approvals for buildings, for town buildings and commercial and residential buildings. And there are initiatives in other towns that are looking to a net zero requirement for new construction. And that's pushing it. So I think that's part of what the committee will be discussing. It's a lot easier to build something brand new and get it to net zero than it is to retrofit something and get it to net zero.
Absolutely hear you there.
I'm like gutting the building down to the studs, helps bring it back to a version of what
It does, but
You have to have a home for everybody before you gut it.
it.
Right? So if you want to gut the high school and retrofit it, you gotta have build a new high school. So where to put them?
Hank, may I ask you a question? Because this is something big and long concern. So for every grover building, and we know that's likely going to be designed is really going to be starting those some original design.
we're in design development.
The net zero concept of that, and it being on and all like every geothermal.
We're just getting preliminary pricing on that. It will be, and also we're getting preliminary pricing on this potential for a solar canopy and battery backup. As an all-electric building, we have to look at various options for generator. either as an emergency generator. So all of those considerations are being viewed, and you're welcome to come to the next PVPC meeting or listen in.
I'm just curious about the phrase net zero. Net zero, I mean, the concept of net zero means the possibility of getting it where everything, the whole carbon footprint of the building is offset by some renewable source of energy coming from somewhere. Usually it's coming from somewhere close by, let's say some on the property. So on that particular building, obviously the engineering hasn't been fully spec'd out, but I can imagine it's 100 to 200,000 kilowatt hour building or somewhere around there. And a solar canopy on that property would be fairly small in comparison to the needs. So it is a phrase, the net zero, or just or the efficiency of the building is that's not the highest standards for there. I'm just curious of the phrasing.
The design team has a energy consultant who is looking at all of those aspects. They're looking at, they're definitely going to replace every single window within the building. They're looking at the cost benefit of putting in triple glazing versus double glazing. They're looking.
There's going to be spray foam installation.
Certainly in the.
I don't think this is the
Okay,
right
sorry.
discussion for here.
Sorry,
It's
cut
a
it.
PVPC
No, that's
discussion.
fine. Cut it off. Cut it off. Cut it off.
I would encourage, I would encourage you to listen in on the PVPC meeting. We will be getting into those details.
Good call.
Looking through the other benchmarks that are within your overall agenda.
Can I go back to MAPC for just a moment? When they're crafting that baseline for us, I understood at first that baseline was for the municipal portion of business. Are they also going to be looking at building a baseline for Needham as a town, including our residential and business commercial properties? Or is that another piece of work that we're going to have to figure out somewhere else?
I believe they're focusing on the municipal operations of vehicles, so government buildings and schools. So to broaden that perspective, I think we would either expand their remit or bring in that green light to assist us in that.
Okay, so I guess I would just say one of my questions would be, who does it make the most sense to have do that? Because that is a piece of information that this committee is going to need as we think about public insurance.
I think we have. Somewhere I've seen overall energy usage for the town.
So
of
Green Needham
Needham.
did some overall
We-
energy
And we
usage
did
that's
some
current
things
data. I
using,
believe, that you're talking
right,
about. It's
well, for
current.
baseline, but I think they have, because the MAPC has a tool
That's what
that we
I do
drilled
think
into, and I
MAPC
think
has
it's
some
got, I mean, they base it on some per capita
assumptions.
numbers. So you can change the year or the range of years in there.
So I do think that's something we should ask so that we understand where that is coming from.
Mhm.
So Hank was looking through the chart. I don't know if everybody else has taken a look through the chart and if there are other questions you might have related to that.
So that gets into 4 was recommending adoption of target dates, benchmarks, and/or annual goals, just tracking. But the benchmarks are the very first step, and you're right, we would have to expand that in order to meet the requirements of the word request of the 2050 roadmap that the state has established. Cross-sector efforts, I think, would both be related to existing buildings and new buildings, but would have to expand to look at vehicle. I know that Green Needham, you also have links to EVs, electric vehicle There's sources, yeah.
There's Drive Green, Massachusetts has quite a lot of information.
In terms
More
of
for residential, less for the check on municipal vehicles, special vehicles.
But in terms of data, just a baseline?
No, I think encouraging people to buy green. I know there are various programs
Yes.
with state and local where there are advocates who bring their EVs. Once we get the charging stations in, maybe there could be Saturday events to encourage people to come in.
And I think once we
Test drive.
come back from COVID, and
Yeah.
we did organize a test drive EVs around town hall 2 years back, and it was pretty successful. The weather was terrible, but we still got a bunch of people driving cars, which was nice.
They 450 gallon.
Yeah.
Thank God for
Hey, can I ask a question? Just, I don't know if we skipped this on the agenda, but the available resources in the staff room. This might get a little into the how we work, but what are the resources that we have available besides the folks gathered here? How do we get to data when we need data? How much are we going to be interfacing with town staff in terms of having conversation about what's possible or what's in flight?
Yeah, we're these are your initial resources.
It's clear.
We're thinking of setting up a OneDrive, trying to determine whether that can be accessible to the full committee and others. We do have a shared drive, but that's a bit more difficult for people who aren't employees of the town. So we are exploring how to set that up as a file folder system where we can put information in and draw information. You can also add information. As I mentioned, there's potential for some summer interns. We had made offers to 3. We're now down to 2. Hopefully, at least one will step forward, one of whom is a town resident. We also have interest by the high school environmental club, who have been advocating for solar canopies at the high school. And we were approached by Amoresco, who did a brief study for both that installation and Newman. I think Newman parking lot would be perhaps the first, because Newman, I think, is the 3rd highest energy user in the town. And then so we have those resources. Whether we would reach out to other local colleges to see whether professors and groups might take on the charge of assistant analysis. For instance, Olin, having a strong electrical. Maybe we could find a professor who would take on the charge of doing an analysis for that. And
Talk to somebody at Babson, who they have it's their entrepreneurial grants, but the idea of developing some kind of a model, using Needle as an example, so they could take our commercial real estate data and take various energy indices and somehow be able to model commercial residential energy use, because it would be applicable. Every town is going to have to do this, and we don't necessarily want every business to collect their energy bills. And so there may be some resources in there with people looking at an entrepreneurial model. How can we use all the data sources and come up with pretty good numbers?
I think we can get to Eversources.
Actually, I think we need got that.
We
That
got
was
it,
the
and I'm not
basis
quite
for-
sure how we got it and
Yeah.
how good it is, but in terms of finding out what of that are businesses, what are homes, that's what's tricky. What's across the road in a large building, what's in a pizza place.
Well, we have National Grid has data that they access all the time for buildings, at least the electrical usage. Eversource, I haven't tracked that particular usage. But not, this is not, gas be huge, this is strictly total hour usage. I just get what I need. So National Grid, I haven't been able to get it at this point, absolutely, but I will admit I haven't spent a lot of time trying to get it.
But there are some resources between the actual data and the real estate analytics. I think we could probably.
Well, that's where I would lean toward.
So I think one of the other things that this committee can think about is, once we get to the point where we can define what data we need, where the data holes are, if that can be defined, we can see if there's a resource we have that has the ability to work with that, or whether we need to define a project that needs to go as a town meeting request in the fall, right? That would be the appropriate time that we could get funding for that.
Yeah.
So I know that the town manager and I have talked that there is an anticipation that may be a request that's forthcoming from this committee for the fall, but we need to figure out what we have, what we don't have, what we can't get.
Can we make some access, or is it appropriate to the Mass Energy Insight data?
I think I can, yeah, I think I can make a read-only access as well. I haven't done that, but I think I can.
I think you
Yeah.
can. I mean, I actually still have full access.
Yeah.
I'll come clean.
So can I just ask one thing I think would be helpful is the state's climate mitigation resilience goals. What are they? I think they have that as the starting point.
I'll come
And
right back.
if the state says, here's,
Items,
yeah,
and one of the
here's-
first thing was understand the state's
so,
climate.
so let's understand like what we're on the hook for, because that's our purpose. And everything flows from there. So once you understand what their goals are, then you're like, okay, what's the baseline we need to mitigate from? And if that includes municipal, residential,
It includes
commercial.
all of it.
And then we figure out how we get the data for all of those.
Yeah.
The way I know that, the city of Boston, the city of Cambridge, they get all the commercial business data through a program called the Building Energy Use Ordinance. So,
Proto, yes.
Bordeaux, you would go out and say, okay, if you're a building less than or more than 5,000 square feet, you're not a pizza shop, you gotta just let us know, be transparent what you're using, and then we can go to Eversource and get the main data and subtract out the commercial businesses of everything over 5,000, subtract out the municipal buildings, and then we know kind of what the residents profile looks like. So at least we have kind of a methodology to get that. But I think it's got to start with like, I don't know, the state's kind of, what are they requiring of the town and what's in scope and what's out of scope? Like cars coming through town, is that in the scope?
So I think, no, cars coming through town is out of scope.
Okay, because we have that
I
in
don't
our
think
charge
we should
here.
solve that.
Yeah, pass-throughs in our
Yeah,
charge. So
yeah.
I want to kind of start with the state and then take things out of the charge that aren't related to the state, because if we want to keep that as our
So I don't
focus.
think we should go through and do that tonight.
Yeah, just to get a copy so we can read.
I think
Just
it
for
should be
our own
our
education.
first agenda
Oh,
item at our
or you
next
send us a
meeting,
link.
but,
No,
yeah.
I will send you all the link.
Good.
And the basis is the Climate Protection and Green Economy Act of 2008. I'll send you a link to that. Followed by Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2030. And then there's a very thick document called Massachusetts 2050 Decarbonization Roadmap. In it, it breaks down all of the different sectors, what the goals are, and how you get there. Sorry, I should have sent that out in advance, but that can
Well,
be
we
your
should have read
reading.
it. We should have read it in advance. I just didn't know where to find it.
That will be something we send out to
Thank you.
all, at
It's
least the
not
links.
easy to find, I will say that.
Yeah. The other
People
thing,
use different names for each one of these bills too.
Right, and some of them is what was a bill, which one was passed, and like there's a couple versions, so we have the right version that They said too.
I think the general principle is there's a roadmap to 2050, which I think is 80%. And then there are targets for each decade. And the other thing that I think will be
And it
part
includes everything in the town. Pretty much, basically, yeah, but
Those
not
are-
passing through. So,
That's the legally.
Or planes flying over the
no,
Okay, okay.
not planes over
Our
there, yeah.
airspace, okay.
planes over there. The other thing you asked about staffing. Many towns who've gone through this process before have a director of sustainability or a similar position like that as a full-time staff. And I think one of the questions that will come to this committee is should that be a recommendation to the select board to establish that as a new position in the town? And if so,
Can I ask you a follow-up question to that? So in terms of under this guise of resources, is everything that we propose, we have to go back and get funding requests, or where, in terms of resources and funding right now, is there money earmarked for this? Or, that will help us make some decisions too, in terms of what a reasonable expectation can be for funding.
Yes, we will need to go back for funding for most of the.
Okay. Okay. And and what's that process look like?
It depends on, I guess, what the funding request is. There is the availability to request like capital era funding during the fall town meeting. Most of the operating budget does come to like the new position that we were recommending or hoping to recommend would come around in the spring town meeting. So it's too late for the one in May, but potentially next year getting that funded for July.
That would be
And are they,
with the data that certainly shows that towns that have put in those positions have thus far made much greater strides toward accomplishing some of their goals because they have manpower dedicated to figure out how to put the agenda along. So there are benefits, but we have a finance committee that's very careful with us about how we add positions. So it will take some lobbying.
and Mary Ann, are there any, or anyone, Hank, are there any initiatives that have already been funded?
Well, the green communities.
Yeah.
Right.
Has funding.
There's also in the DPW budget, it was annual. I believe we took this year off to spend down the money that we had, but are coming back in FY24. So a year from now for additional funding of about $100,000 in energy efficiency projects that we that come up, whether it's one big project, a couple of smaller projects. Historically, it's been used a lot for lighting because they're just kind of short dollar, like quick projects that don't require a lot of extra manpower. But yeah, we do have that in addition to everything else.
Are we seeking any green communities competitive funding?
Yes, we are eligible. I'm going for it in the fall.
What's the level of that?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's around like $100,000 to $200,000.
But within your energy budget, we could bring Beth Greenblatt on board. for
Yes.
instance. And we're paying something to Maypac for their services, a limited.
Are there any initiatives that require early action that we want to be part of that doesn't want to wait until the budget season that this group wants to discuss earlier? Because either you can get grants for it or because there's something that has deadlines for the state that we would benefit from, that we would want to consider earlier.
But you'd mentioned community electricity aggregation, which requires a warrant to be passed at town meeting for the town to even begin the process. But that would, it sounds like the next opportunity would be fall for that article. It's not a budget item though. It's the initial is just to give the town the authority to negotiate on that process. So that might be little bit more time bound if we think it's a priority.
Does aggregation fit into this process?
It
Here,
does, in the sense that, we count residential, commercial users, energy use as well. So in here, there's two things that it can do. It receives a negotiated price on the basis of all the town's business, right? So you would expect to be able to negotiate a better price than individual households receive just on the rate set by the state. And it lets you negotiate the basis of a percent of green power that comes in through that. Now, to some extent, that's limited by how much green power is even available.
Right.
But, obviously, if everybody in the state decided that they were all going to 100% green power, it does not exist. So,
I think that the incentives or the opportunities are increasing as the offshore wind industry comes to fruition over the next hopefully 3 to 5 years.
But the short end, I mean, the nice thing about the aggregation is it allows us, everyone in the town, to reduce the town's carbon footprint through their own pocket, as opposed to the town strictly funding things for its building. And it's measurable.
Yeah, I believe also that I believe something that's changing in the state is about the large solar arrays that used to be a little bit more regional and where they allow it to be counted. I believe that's changed so that we cross boundaries now. So that we have a source of national grid which is owned. So I believe that.
That's New England.
Yeah. So it's state broad and where it can actually be counted as. I have green energy in my house and an array that's in Falmouth, for example. Falmouth, Mass, where they do this.
So another flavor of aggregation, it's not just residential, but for commercial municipalities. I know that in the city of Boston, where they have like disclosure ordinance, but they have reductions and they allow virtual purchase agreements for your way to count towards your reduction in dirtier grid areas. So, I know a number of towns, cities I can't name, but, through power options, they can join aggregation for their municipal buildings to offset their with all renewable energy, by standing up wind farms in the Midwest or in the South and dirtier grid areas and take those credits against your footprint here in New England. Because it is hard to get renewable energy projects stood up in New England, and it is a clean grid area.
Yeah.
But through these aggregation partnerships, which are all happening right now, real time, to Natasha's question, like what should we be doing right now? These projects are in such high demand. If we're sitting here 3 or 4 years from now, and we come to the conclusion we want to do this, you can't afford it. So offsets, RECs, virtual power purchase agreements, nobody was pursuing these 2 years ago. Now they're flying off the shelf. You will not get a large scale, like 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt solar farm, wind farm to count against your municipal or your business footprint here in Needham. You won't get it 5 years from now that you can't afford it. So I think something maybe we should put on our agenda sooner rather than later is are we missing the boat on something? Because every state has these requirements now. Everybody's going out for the low hanging fruit. These large scale projects have the greatest impact. I mean, if you have a couple of towns, municipal buildings coming together, a couple of cities, name the cities you want, and you can put up a 100 megawatt wind farm in North Dakota or South Dakota or North Carolina, the impact you have for the climate is much better than you putting individual solar rooftop arrays on your carports here in your towns. So
from what you know, right, that this would be something that we could explore, say with Wellesley for starters, right? They're interested in a similar area. I don't know where Newton is, but
yeah, and it's through like power options is the way that these towns can do that because they have competitive purchasing rules for towns and municipalities, so they can't just independently do that because it's taxpayer money. You got to bid it out. So power options is one partner right now that's in the middle of a couple of large aggregations that to say, hey, power options, what's our opportunity to offset our municipal buildings at least as a first step?
So you're saying that doesn't have to follow the same footprint that community aggregation?
No, it's a different aggregation. So it's two separate paths of aggregation. They're two very different things.
If I understand the aggregation, that town basically aggregates it, but then has to send out the invoices. Isn't it?
No,
no,
basically,
no.
so,
That's a
They do
light
that.
plant, that's different.
so for example, if you're in Cambridge, you can choose to, for your new account, you're automatically moving to Cambridge, you automatically get signed up with the Cambridge aggregation. If you're a commercial customer, you can jump back and forth and you can say, I want 100% green through the Cambridge City aggregation, and you can opt in. But you get the bill, it's billed through Eversource.
It just changes the supply, your bill as a supplier and all the distribution aspect of it. The supplier line will essentially just say, Needham aggregation, where it'll just have a name of quote who our supplier is. And that'll have a certain rate associated with it, whether someone opts in for 100% renewable, or some variation thereof.
And different towns have different, some just, I think Boston has a plain vanilla 100% green, and I believe it's 20% extra. You can
Choose your level.
choose each town can choose their dial of how far in they want to go.
I think you can say
And I-
60% baseline that you can opt up to 100 back down to whatever the state minimum is.
I did receive an email from Power Options about the green aggregation, and I can send that around. If there are people in the group who want to explore that specifically, that'd be a great idea. I should say that 10 years ago, we did have somebody look at all of the town roofs, all the schools for solar PV, and the majority of them had problems either due to structural upgrades or age of roof. And we don't recommend putting on solar PV on rooftop unless both of those are viable. I think that there are other studies that we can do related to, for instance, Nike, which is sort of the only other large plot of land that's remote, might be able to put PV on it, but its connection to the grid would require substantial upgrades. Now, whether there's a possibility of tying that directly into the Charles River pump station or not would be a separate discussion. But I think there are a whole variety of renewable options that the town could continue to explore on its own, in addition to the aggregation.
We had a student, Green Needham had one of our people who's since moved away, I think, worked with a student and just using PV watts and mapped out various vacant town-owned pieces as well as some of the parking lots. And I'll dig it up as far as what the potential was for various parcels. There's some potential. Obviously, you can't pay over deposit of it, so but
No, but that hillside that
along
abuts
the tracks,
the tracks.
but that's a resource that we've got somewhere.
Poor turkey.
So I think, if I continue to move down the goals here, we've talked a fair amount about greenhouse gases. Number 6, it's looking at energy reduction sources and generation. We've discussed that. In terms of the built environment, the zoning aspect and the siting and code related issues, we can look at the municipal and school locations, but to look more broadly, I think we would need to have other sources or resources to investigate other opportunities. I live in Concord, and they have a group of students who went out and kind of targeted various houses and then sent emails to those people to say, by the way, your house has a beautiful southern orientation.
We actually did that with the solar.
Did you?
We went to Google sign.
Yeah, we had some of the high school students doing it at one point.
Well, it might be a good thing to do again.
So on this, can we stop for
Yeah.
a quick question on the, so when you talk about the built environment and zoning, for example, I know that there's a lot of towns right now that we're looking at home rule petitions to require electric only in new construction or heavily modified construction. And Attorney General has actually said, no, cannot do that. Meanwhile, at the state, there's a net zero stretch energy code that's in development, which has been largely panned for not being truly fossil fuel free. Thinking in terms of like what we can accomplish and that we're not in a bubble, is our scope also to try to push the state forward on these things to say, you know, Needham, for example, would like to see an actual fossil free energy stretch code offered up, or are we going to sort of keep that out of scope? Any thoughts on that? It's a loaded question. I know it's not an easy question to ask, but I thought, you know, you can only go so far under current state law.
So I think that might come under the banner of, you know, what you were saying earlier, Mary Ann, about there's knowns and unknowns.
Yes.
So right now, with the knowns that are known, the state's like, well, you really can't, you know, do it as, you know, just bitches. I think we're going to get to a point with some of the technology and some of the breakthroughs where it's going to be sort of like, oh, this is a no-brainer. Like, okay, we can require this. It's just like LED light bulbs, right? You know, once we get, you know, air source heat pumps to a point of efficiency and adoption, and the contracting community is familiar with it, and the builders are familiar with it, maybe they build a competitive advantage with it. Then I think it becomes a tipping point where, like 7-8 years from now, that will just flip. Like they'll write the legislation in that direction, like, oh yeah, there's no stretch code. This is the code, right? So I think for us to spend time like hammering away at something, like that's effort we should be applying to, like, we got to like decarbonize what we can here, you know, and come up with other strategies for more renewable energy, whether it's out of state, in state, you know, in our car parking lots and on our roofs. Like I think it's multi-pronged.
And I think we don't want to be a new.
I think that's true.
What does that?
What does that mean?
I corrected you.
New Rockland is a good thing to be a Newton.
Well, in terms of they're pushing a, may I say, foolish or not fully thought out ordinance with good intentions that is very well intentioned. I'll leave it at that. It's one of the stupidest pieces of things I've ever seen.
Oh, is that what it is?
And but anyway, that I think
So I guess I would have said, I would have agreed with Joe and with Nick in the sense of, I'm not sure that I want to spend our committee's time lobbying the state. I'd rather spend it focused here, because if the state writes something that doesn't include that now, right? And frankly, the amount of time it would take us to convince the town to pass that in town meeting would be huge. So I'd rather be focused on what we really can do. And I do think that's going to come. But, you know, breakthroughs are happening all the time. If we keep kind of ratcheting step function up, what can occur, we're not there yet. And when it becomes obvious, I do believe, you know, we're going to continue to work to do what we can do with every project we take on, evaluate what's the best we can do for this project, and what can we be ready for given what we think is coming. So that's my expectation of the design work that you're sourcing. And that's what I see happening.
Well, I'm glad we're having the discussion. I just want to make sure that we're explicit about what's in scope, what's out of scope.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of lobbying, if individuals want to send in their letters to the legislature, whether you
Go
can
for it.
represent the town.
You can't represent the town. I think that's
You
clear.
can represent it.
Just one other comment about not being in a bubble. So when we were working on the white paper about doing a climate action plan, we spoke with MAPC and we spoke with Megan Hockey over there and asked her what are the critical success factors for these in other towns and cities. And she actually said, it was surprising to me, it wasn't the list you come up with. It's not the projects that you come up with, it's the process. In her mind, and obviously this is great, because we already have a nice cross representation here, town, different boards and residential. But her whole urgence was really to think broad about how many people you can bring in. Obviously, you can't take people away from their day jobs and have them sit in the meetings, but the more that town staff and the different boards are asked to contribute, small or big. The bigger, the better the project is. So I just wanted to state that so we can think of ourselves as part of a bigger thing, not just an insular group sitting in a conference room next 2 weeks. Coming up with a document.
One thing that maybe, I don't know if it's out of scope, but I was at a Build Boston conference a few weeks ago, which the Northeast Energy Partnership ran a little workshop where we were basically doing an hour-and-a-half game of coming up with scenarios for Energyville, Massachusetts, in terms of representing different areas, and everyone had to role play. And it was a really fun exercise, and it would be very cool to get a larger group, just in terms of some of the challenges that people are facing. How do we, in this case, we were decarbonizing Energyville.
And they have it set up as an exercise?
They could. I asked them if they did, and they said, well, maybe they'd run it a couple of times at these Northeast Sustainable Energy Association events. And it's sort of something out there in terms of when we get to a point, maybe in 6 months, if we want to engage with a broader group, to say, well, okay, let's look at, let other people think about what some of these issues are. So Hank, you're going to be a commercial developer, and you're going to put that hat on, and mindset, and let's look at different perspectives.
So there may be a place where that fits. I'm not sure. where
Yeah,
it
it's something,
fits
it's
yet.
just that,
Wells has just come through their process, and they went through initial stage of getting their baseline in place, and then another stage of engaging broader community groups, sort of by, sort of sector. I don't know how Arlington rolled out their process, but I'm curious to go take a look and maybe call and ask that question. So I do think there's multiple ways to engage broader groups, and there will be time for that.
Mhm.
It's probably not tonight. or
no,
next
no,
meeting.
not at all.
It is important. It's really important, in fact, to do at some point, because as I keep saying, all of these things have to get through town meeting, which means people need to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it.
So, which brings something up, is I think we were talking about communication and the effectiveness of it, how to be a success. What do we do as we're moving along for communication to the community? So they're not left in the dark at when you get to the tail end saying, here's our recommendations. I'm not saying they'll be sitting at the meeting every meeting, but what do we do to increase success when we do get to that point of here's what we believe, here's our recommendation, what do we do? What do we do?
I don't know how you want to break it down, but in the charge, number 7 talks about what this committee is supposed to do by the conclusion. And while we can go off in a number of tangents, we don't necessarily have to solve every problem. We have to identify the issues, identify the opportunities, and create focus on a path forward, I think. Some of these we can dig into, but I think it's also important on item D, which is actions to protect environmental justice communities. That what I've heard is some of the municipal aggregation can have the greatest negative impact on those who can't afford it. So we have to be cautious about those issues and be mindful of those. Just getting into the goals for 2050, the state does have this roadmap, and we can either get on board with it or figure out how we interpret that. And so that'll be your homework assignment for the next meeting. Because it is quite detailed, but it's also fairly open. And identify those strategic options and initiatives. We don't have to solve all of those, but we do want to identify what those are and to identify a pathway forward, I think, in each topic. And if there are structural changes, within the town, I should mention that in item 6 here, it talks also about water, sewer, and stormwater, wastewater management, infrastructure, open space, agriculture, and forestry. So that's where a working group of DPW staff who are already working on those issues, many of those issues, we can draw on their knowledge base, but also their data that they've already produced, and make a bit more transparent what they are going through. And in terms of the permitting, I think that's a direct discussion with Natasha and the planning board, and how that might be impacted. It certainly is impacting each one of our new municipal projects. PVPC, with Natasha's help, we had a net zero presentation, and the Permanent Public Building Committee, their opinion was that it's not their remit to do that. It's to each user group or the town to come back to the PVPC and say net zero is an important target. We certainly went for lead silver on Sunita Williams because there was financial incentive given by the MSBA to do so. We don't necessarily have the same financial incentives to go after that for every other municipal building. Although there's some rebate.
Hank, I have a question though. If you ask the user groups maybe are not as aware of building and construction and design. So how can they each individually make a recommendation? Shouldn't the PPBC set some standards? Because they're the ones that kind of look at it globally?
Yes, I mean, their current standard is to meet the building code.
Right, but if we want to do more than the building code, I mean, I guess would the PPBC be the ones setting, would we encourage them to set higher standards? Or how does that work? Because I think to asking the user groups what they would like to meet is difficult, because I don't think that that's their expertise.
Does that require a change to bylaws or a town meeting?
Well, I think certainly a recommendation from this committee to achieve net zero ready on all future town projects would be an important statement from this committee.
Could say the PVPC even say, well, you should exceed code by 30%. Could you do that unilaterally?
They certainly could. And so it's not only in the current projects that are being constructed, but Broad Meadow and Elliott are approaching 20 years since construction. The mechanical units on the rooftop there need to be replaced. Putting in
I see you blinking, Rachel.
backup generator if we're doing. So there are a lot of implications as to how that's interpreted and what the costs are. And so rather than just looking at the cost to replace a unit in kind on the rooftop, we're looking at a much broader principle and impacts on each one of those buildings.
And I'm just gonna say, we have a request in for designing those 2 replacements in July for funding. So any recommendations, the earlier the better, because otherwise we're gonna kind of install something or design something and then have to go back and.
I can't, but got you with it. You can go first, Joe.
Yeah, I think that Hank's suggestion is right. I think that would come from this group, is to say, there are state mitigation goals. It is easier to do new buildings amazingly well because it's hard to retrofit older buildings. So this committee would say, here's mandate, here's a plan. Any new building, you have to do this because it's the easiest way to do it for the future and to keep those mitigation goals in place. And then for existing buildings, it is harder and here's some guidance for upcoming buildings that, it would come from this group as a recommendation. And then, because you're right, the user group's like a different place. They don't see the state mandate and what you have to get to, and like, what's a low hanging fruit and what's not. And what are sort of the rules to pick that?
And I would say, I sit here tonight, I don't have the information based on what you've said to know what's the rational plan. So I would need to understand what the costs relatively to the town look like for replacing rooftop units and what the delta is to doing the other retrofit. And then there's gonna have to be a decision looking at what that looks like for the next 20 years as we do that for every building that's currently got this structure. And how is that layering in, and is it then sufficiently required to make our strategy work? Or can we make it work without that? I don't know the answer to that question today.
And do we have the resources to answer that question today? Or does this committee have to provide?
Or what would we need?
Yeah, what would we need that?
Well,
Yeah.
so for instance, on these replacements, they're probably going to be more than $500,000. So it would then, that's the threshold between what the building maintenance department does versus
I think
project.
more than that.
Before that, which goes to the PBBC. PBBC would then be responsible for hiring the designer. And if the remit, the recommendation is to look at net zero as an opportunity, that would be a charge that we give to spouse. In any case, any new mechanical equipment would have to include energy recovery wheels. But all of those currently have natural gas feeding those units. They're not all electric. And there might be some opportunity to put solar PV on top of the building, but structural upgrades would be required. So that's it's more than just a summer project.
So,
And when you do that, then you also have to look at, do you replace the roof and improve the thermal efficiency of that? So there are a lot of implications associated with each system within the building.
And here we already know that, for example, LE school structural is required for balance the system, as I always said. We already know that for LE school.
I do so.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, in terms of what we can do as a committee, and this is a perfect example where you're in the process of looking at a 15, 20-year asset that needs replacing. If this committee says it should be considered, electrification of rooftop unit replacement should be considered, how much of an impact when you go out to bid for design? Is that a minor recommendation that we can say, look at it?
No, we just write it into the
Right, so, I
departments.
mean,
It's part of the.
I would say it's actually what's going to be most helpful coming from this committee is I can imagine replacing things as approaching more net zero and making the necessary improvements are going to add money to these projects, and as opposed to replacing in kind or repairing in kind. And so having that backup when I go in front of the finance committee to ask for now 20% more, knowing that it's coming from a committee like this instead of just DPW around would definitely also be incredibly helpful, because it's something that you guys are showing that the town wants to move forward with and is looking to make these investments. Would help me argue.
I'm gonna say something that goes against how much my normal flavor of life, and that is this. When we, in this, for example, replacement coming up with the air source heat pumps, they're very expensive to run, which means the town will have less money. These are spending more money on the heating of the building, is the air source heat pump, which means they have less money to spend on other things, which will be perhaps have a higher return. I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm saying we have to look at everything. We only have so much money in what we're doing, and how do we allocate that money? I hate saying that because I just want to go and do it. I truly do. I actually want to go geothermal, but the fact remains is we have to look at what it costs to run these things, and then how does that take to feed our budget for all the stuff we want to do, which might have a bigger impact. I hate to say it, but I'm gonna say it.
That's gonna
I
be
think it's a really important point and something we're gonna have to maybe do as a committee as we go forward is, you know, how do we make decisions and make recommendations to move forward? Like, what is the criteria that us as a team will use to put forth ideas? Because there's an infinite number of things we could do, but certainly we have a lot of constraints. And what will be the framework our team uses to kind of make those recommendations? And I'm not sure if there's some recommendations from you all from the town of ways other groups do this, but I think we're gonna have to come to some agreement too.
I agree. I think we picked that example right off the bat and we tackle it. We get a consultant in and say, I know anything at MIT, we're looking to electrify our first building. Your eyeballs will fall out of your head. It's that expensive. And you're like, the electric bill goes up. Does it really save any carbon? Because the grid isn't clean right now. The grid is only 25% renewables, 20% renewables or less, right? It's the grid's run on natural gas. And the carbon from plants that run on natural gas, very inefficient. You could heat your own building with natural gas a lot more efficient than heating it with electricity, right? So there's a carbon benefit, there's an annual operating cost benefit, there's a capital cost upcharge. I think this group can say, let's take one building, how are we going to tackle this and how does it relate to the state's plan over the long term? And I think once you make a decision, and that comes back to process, if you have a solid process on how you make that one decision, you can stand in front of whatever planning board or select board or whoever it is and say, this is how we looked at it. This is a tough decision. These are not easy decisions right now. I mean, every major organization is struggling with it to hit these net zero goals. So your first one's the hardest one. I think there's enough brain power here. Let's look at the facts and say, are we gonna, this is going to be hard and it's going to be expensive. To decarbonize by 80% by FY50, incredibly expensive. Incredibly expensive, incredibly hard. It's going to take resources and staff and dedication. I mean, you're not going to like skate through this.
But the dangers are.
Right, I do think you need to understand what the model is and what the cost is, and you're gonna sit there and say, once you understand that, it may be, this is not the right thing to do today. It may be the thing to revisit in.
When the grid gets greener in 10 years, that's a 10-year
5 years or
decision.
10 years,
And
right,
how long
figure
are we
out
going to
when
get out of
you're
the
going back to-
assets? Maybe we can get 10 or 15 years out of the assets, replacing them as they are now, because it won't have a carbon benefit until the grid is green. And we don't control when the grid is green. So it's a multivariable problem that you have to look at. What do we tackle today versus what do we tackle 5-10 years from now?
So I do think there's some level of investment now, just to understand what that piece looks like for the town. So we can say, this is why we made the decision that we're gonna replace them as it is today, or whatever it might be. Okay, I think you have to figure out what makes sense to do now, because making it all ready today doesn't get the benefit of spending all the money to do that.
And I also think, knowing that we're gonna revisit it in 10 years, we're gonna revisit it in 20, or we're just not gonna come back to it, also is important to know, and it does also affect the decisions that we make today.
How do we, so some of these problems are a little intersectional too, though, right? Because you go to green municipal aggregation, suddenly your power theoretically is 100% or 60%. Does that change the calculus and the decision like this? It may or may not. I don't know. I'm just like, how do we try to keep both of these things?
Well, there's a carbon footprint. And whenever I'm talking to anyone, and I've had a lot of talk, and Rick, I'm sure you as well, as far as air source heat pumps. What's the CO2 reduction if I use air source heat pumps? Where's the benefit to the environment related to the energy where it's coming from? Obviously, if it's solar energy that's powering the air source heat pumps, completely different story. But if it's not, where's the offset? There are studies that say it is a CO2 offset. But if that's all we're looking at, CO2 offset, that data is out there. A kill BTU per UTU, the therm, the data is out there as far as what it's going to reduce. But we have to look at that aspect, but also the cost of what the resources being taken away from something else we can do, which might have a bigger reduction in CO2.
Right.
That's all.
So when we think about process and we kind of make more decisions, do we need to adopt something that values the carbon reduction?
And
It's
will
like
the
a
state-
social, like a social cost of
And
carbon.
will the state let us count it. And will they let us count it? Yeah, because the
I mean-
state won't let you count carbon offsets and all this stuff. But they might change their mind later, but you're right.
Right.
There are within, I'm just looking back at the state thing, and there are ways in which to achieve their 2030 goals and 2040 goals and so on and so forth. So we can use that as a framework and figure out how that applies to the town.
And that's where we start.
And what the state has been doing, for instance, they're going to limit fossil fuel incentives, heating system incentives, begin to back that off. So when you want to replace your boiler in your house, oh, I don't get a fossil, I can't replace it with a more efficient gas-fired boiler, but I can get a $10,000 incentive to convert to all electric. So changing those incentives and letting people know that those incentives are being changed and coupling that with federal incentives, I think will be a huge aspect to that transition. And then looking at ways in which to combine that with other aspects. But any major transition in the building, public or private, gives you that opportunity. And that's also what they state here, is both new construction and major changes to existing buildings are the best time, and also vehicles, buying new vehicles. That's the best time to invest in. Yes, it might cost a little bit more now, but there are savings in the long term.
Can't get any of them delivered right now.
When you say new construction, are you just talking municipal or residential?
All.
Oh.
And so, for instance, I assume something's going to happen on the Fuzzy Ford site sometime soon, and whether that corporation or developer will be incentivized in some way to look at net zero or approaching net zero in their construction. There's a question the town can ask. I don't think it can insist on it at this point. But there are corporations that are being very proactive in that regard. But it's very difficult for a lab facility to achieve that, or a hospital to achieve
But we can recommend, Hank, so if we have a plan for recommendations for new, different levels of development, then it would kind of be across the board as a fair way of the way we want the town to move forward as a recommendation. I don't know how that works necessarily, but I feel like if we're not in agreement as to how to move forward with future developments, it will hurt the projects, collectively. So I think we just have to have a plan as to what we think is acceptable and what we would recommend. And they have to figure out if that's something that they are willing to, work with us on.
So as we look at new development in town, the carbon impact for both the buildings and how people get to them, just putting that into the planning equation.
So that it becomes structured. I think what some of the pieces from what I've learned from the planning board, I've only been on the planning board for less than a year, almost a year, is the communication piece of it in different ways. And I think that it would be beneficial for the planning board to have clarity on some of these things. These are the things that we're looking to do for the town because we have an overarching idea of what the town, what the goals are. And this is how these projects can contribute and make recommendations to what we would like to see moving forward. Would help people understand what it is that we're looking for. If we don't say anything and we're just expecting them to give us what they want, they're probably going to do the minimum because they have other costs and other priorities. But if that's a priority for the town, then everyone knows where we stand and how we would like projects to move forward.
And I think, Nick, you had mentioned the buildings themselves and how they get there. We have even less control over how they get there, but yeah.
But it is part of, if suddenly
It's part of all of it.
5,000 people are coming into Muzzy Ford every day, that's gonna be a problem, even if they are all electric.
But the conversation starts with, hey, the state has these goals.
Right.
We're in it with the state. This is what we're on the hook for. We have to require, this is not just because us being, green and we just want to be better than everyone else. This is why you need to do it. It's not arbitrary anymore. It's like, this is what we have to do. And here's some guidelines about, year 1, 10, 20, but it is easier to do it new construction. I mean, that's the one big lesson learned.
So prioritizing what we want for new construction is a piece of work that this group should take on sooner rather than later.
And the state goal for 2030 is a 45% gross emission reduction below 1990 levels. So there's different start points and different thresholds. But they target renewables, they target transmission, they target new construction, electrification, buildings, transportation.
I can respond to something. We talked about LEED certification. There's a process that goes to get both the official LEED certification of silver, gold, or silver right now. But there's the official certification, but then here's the engineer that actually puts us there, but then there's the actual certification. And they're kind of two different things. A lot of buildings that could be engineered already to kind of be there. And then here's the expensive other part of it. And so I'm just trying to think of how we look at stuff, because the goal is to have it be that quality. The goal isn't necessarily to have it named that, although that has good press. The goal is to get that efficiency in the building, the environmental aspect, the water aspect, to help the people in there, the land environment. That's the goal. So Natasha, how does that fit into just getting that quality, that benefit, without all the other expensive aspect of it?
Well, as I say, the architects, and I think pretty much from now on, every project that the PPC has, it'll be a requirement to look at the energy issues. We do have an energy consultant looking exactly at that issue right now for because hillside is only a temporary use. We're not looking at that issue for hillside.
Yeah.
But we are not going through the full LEED process. However, the embodied carbon, by simply reusing the building, is a great foot up, as you will. Now, we can spend time to calculate all of that, but there are a lot of other things that we can ask, and we are asking the architect to include in terms of green products, without necessarily having to check the boxes. I think the cost I think it's $50,000 to have the lead consultant, maybe more, do all of their work for Sunita Williams. So there's an expense to it, but there is a better return.
That's a small sum for the cost of the building service.
Correct. And I know there are other buildings that we've gone through that we've said are LEED certifiable, but not LEED certified. I think the library went through that exercise, but we did not go through that exercise with the addition to the high school, for instance.
I was going to say, generally, the perspective from the town has been to put the engineer into the building, but not go through the certification process.
And it's something the city of Cambridge actually requires buildings to be LEED certifiable, but not. I went through that years ago with them. Where it was the first one where the developer said, "Well, I don't want to certify," but they still had to prove. There's a definition to say something is certifiable without paying USGBC. Right. A lot of money.
And are they asking for certifiable at a certain level?
You might, I don't know.
I think it's to a gold standard.
It's
Like
gold
silver is
standard,
just like standard
So
industry.
that's-
Anybody
I was
that
gonna say
puts
that's
up a
building
building
code.
today, developer,
Yeah.
silver is like slam dunk, like that's
Right.
not even an issue. Gold is sort of like kind of where you want to
It's
be.
at least a step.
But, the city of Cambridge and Boston, I mean, they have ordinances around how much green roof you have to have, what percentage, how much solar PV do you need to have on the roof. So if they stipulate more performance, they don't like dovetail you into a independent certification. as said earlier.
And in the end, it's the results and the data. Yeah.
Right.
But I think that, when you're reviewing a developer's project, they want to hear, you want to hear that they're approaching, how are you tackling climate action in your project? Like, they want to tell you a good story. And as long as you keep asking the questions, you can put pressure on them in other areas till they come back with the answer you want on the energy performance of the building without, requiring.
We've gone through the charge.
Yes,
Can we say we've gone through the charge?
I think so.
All right.
We'll come back to that.
We'll come back. I know we'll come back. And I'm looking, it is already 7:45. That clock is correct. Discussion of work plan and organization. I didn't have a work plan in mind. I didn't know I was running this. Or I would have thought about one.
You know better.
Right, I'll be more prepared next time. So I think we're gonna need to bring back a proposal for how to organize based on some of the conversations tonight, or actually, I might even hold that until after this group has talked through what the statewide goals are. I think those would be important to thinking about how we want to lay out the work plan. So probably the most important thing will be to think about what are we prepared to commit to for a meeting schedule. The time to meet between, or at least get some things done in between. I guess I would like to propose at this point that we just start with monthly. Seems like it's plenty to start. Then we'll figure out if there's some particular activity that will require something else to get prepared for an upcoming month, but we can start there. We are currently at whatever Monday in the month. What are we? Are we on the third Monday?
So Catherine and I have to jog with the PBBC, who also meets on Mondays.
Okay.
So we just have to make sure they're not concurrent meetings.
Well, then I would ask you and Catherine to take a look at the existing PPP schedule and come back to this group with a proposal for Monday nights.
Assuming Monday nights are good for everyone.
That works, that's the best.
Can we do Monday
Bad as
nights?
any other.
That's
As bad as any other. There we go. That's a great one.
So for next month, that's what we'll be
Rachel
at.
and Natasha, Monday nights, if we stick with that, and then we'll see where the dates fall.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes,
And Natasha and I also juggle if there's a noir.
worry.
Yeah,
How often will these meetings be?
once a month.
Once a month, okay.
Ish. Okay.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
if you
Well,
guys can come back with a proposal-
April's difficult because we have vacation week and we have the League of Women Voters meeting. Well, their presentation on the 25th, which is a Monday night. And the PBBC meets on April 11th.
Are they meeting school vacation week?
No.
Are
So
people on this group away for school vacation week?
I don't know.
I will be.
Oh, school beginning Mondays.
Mondays
Yeah, it's
are-
Patriots Day. Oh, so there you
But,
go.
I could probably.
That's it. Yeah, so that's Patriots Day. So we're off. Yeah.
You
So-
guys aren't on Tuesday?
But April,
You're a real famous like you.
so April 4th,
Holiday.
April 4th would be the only Monday that seems to be available.
That's next week.
Exactly. And then in May, we have town meeting. But
And so town meeting not holding the second.
right, and the PPBC meets on the 16th.
We have new art from 6 to 7 on April 4th.
Oh.
So that is already on the calendar.
Terrible.
Well,
For the next 2 months.
they're not terrible, but they're. Where were we on Thursdays?
Well, we've got the Conservation Commission meetings on Thursday nights, right? So Artie's got,
How many weeks?
We're twice a month.
You're twice.
Yeah, twice a month, and the change club is sometimes floating on Thursday.
Tuesday the 19th.
that's it. Well, that's during the vacation week and Stephen won't be here.
I could,
Right, I'm gonna ask about April 14th. Which is a Thursday. Is that
April,
14th?
no, it's the second, Concom is the second.
14th is the second.
It's the second, so that would be a Concom.
the 19th, Tuesday.
And then 7th and 21st is 55.
Tuesday, the 19th.
We don't have them that night. Because we're meeting on the 13th. So we're not, but that's school vacation week. That was a challenge. So you said you could remote in.
And Natasha could.
Natasha, are you
Oh,
away
no,
school
that's a
vacation week?
planning
Or are
board.
you- Oh,
I,
that's a
I am
planning
away. I am away, this April, which is like in a couple of weeks.
Which is in a couple of weeks.
The 19th is the planning board.
It shouldn't be this hard, you guys.
Practice meeting?
Friday?
Won't be traveling, but that's the beginning.
You know what? Here, I gotta know what to know.
And I can be on the 7th and 21st.
I was gonna say Tuesday, the 12th. It's election day.
Election
Election day. We can meet from 6 to 8.
Oh,
Polls close at 8.
I definitely cannot be at that
Happy
time.
This is no longer.
Is this a polling location? It's not anymore. Is that overnight for people? I mean, select board meeting moves to Wednesday,
I'm sorry, we should.
Tuesday, the 12th.
No.
He's
Oh, you're
campaigning.
Can't be that day.
What better way to campaign to show your volunteer?
You're right about that, as long as we can project it to the whole town. I can meet remotely as I'm walking down the street.
Does a later meeting work for people? We started with it.
I think that's what's the challenge.
Okay.
Please no.
Yeah.
Thursday, the 14th, we already did that.
I'm good the 7th and 21st, if that helps at all.
Oh, 21st of April?
But it's school vacation week.
Seven. Thursday, the 7th.
I'm at the music band in New York City with
You're
my
pro-
son.
You can't.
You said.
What?
Oh, you're watching.
I'm watching.
Well, Hugh Jackman can join in.
Which character you?
I wish.
We back to Monday the 4th.
How about Monday, the 11th? Do we say no?
That's it.
PBBC meets that.
PBBC.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so with that,
I mean,
How about
And we're not on Tuesday the 19th because
It's the, oh,
it's
it's school
Tuesday
vacation.
the 19th.
It's school vacation.
But I thought we were going to be okay with that.
Natasha's away.
Um,
We definitely won't have
Okay.
everybody.
Okay, okay.
Our
Um,
fourth is looking better. It's a little, might be quick.
Or we need to-
Starting at 7.
Fourth? You, whatever you.
We're six.
I have Nuari at 6. So
Starting at seven.
it's not an option for me to start at 6. We could start at 7.
Is that okay?
Natasha, does that work for you? The fourth,
The
After
fourth of-
Newari.
after Nuari at 7, starting at 7?
How long is the meeting? Just, not because it's just sometimes it's a lot, the
So
fourth.
why don't we keep it to an hour and we're just making the sole topic to walk through what the state expectations are. So we know what they are in 2030, 2040, 2050.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay?
So we'll have that information beforehand.
Hank is gonna send that to us ahead of time, so everybody can try to absorb it and we can be prepared.
I'll send you the link. If you want a hard copy.
Okay, so this is which day? The fourth?
This is Monday the 4th.
That's 7.
Should we
At
schedule
7.
them, should we schedule a May meeting while our schedule is not yet full?
That's right.
It'll be one hour, 23rd. How does that work?
In this room?
Yes. We'll have to check, make sure that it's available. So we're saying April 4th, 4/4.
Okay. And then if you want,
7 to 8 p.m.
And then what night is not a BBC meeting?
23rd.
The 23rd.
so
Could we
May
do
20
earlier? Shift it to, say, the ninth, or is that conflict?
The 9th is a holiday. What is it, the 9th?
Potentially town meeting.
May, town meeting, right?
Yeah, okay. Well, then, actually will be, it's,
Yeah,
the special time meeting.
If it goes 3 nights.
Right.
23rd also has a hold on it for Nuari. So we're hitting whatever that same week is.
And no on the 16th.
So-
because-
We'll call it 7 to 8 or 7 to 8:30.
PBBC meeting.
Okay, how about in,
Well, I would say let's take the 23rd because that may be the best thing, but it need to be, again, same timing as the month before, 7.
7.
and that's upside May,
May 23rd.
So we'll send this out.
While we're on the roll. So, 13th. So that's an official.
that's official.
Juneteenth is on Tuesday next.
That's Monday, the 20th.
And that's a holiday.
Yes, that's your holiday.
June 13th. That's
That's seems to be available.
15th, June 13th. Monday the 13th.
You can start at 6 that night, if you want to do that.
Sure.
PM. 6 PM, and I'll try to do all of them here.
It looks like the room's open. So I can put that.
That would talk about someone. Talk about someone next time. Okay. All right, document logistics. So we haven't figured out yet what kind of shared drive we can actually do, right? Is that what I understood.
there's some correspondence back and forth with Miles indicating that we can set up perhaps OneDrive.
Yeah,
I don't know how that works.
I'll check in with Miles tomorrow. I think you can just provide them with the link and give them permission, but let me check in with Miles.
So assuming we can do that, what I can also do is to begin uploading these documents to that OneDrive as folders. So we can just click on that. But
We won't have to go searching.
no, I'll try to send you the exact links wherever possible.
Right.
One of the other things that I was thinking of doing with one of the summer interns was to look at other climate action plans from other communities. Although we, within our in-town group, we have looked at some other communities. And I can certainly send links to the company.
We've got,
The other-
and Wellesley just came through.
Wellesley has a new one. So if that's helpful, I could just send a set of links like those.
I think it's useful to see those. All of those were created before the state goals, I think, were actually out with this level of guidance, but it's still useful to see how people have done that.
Wellesley had.
Hank, I apologize, but I have to jump off. So let me know when you think the next meeting will be, unless it's April 4th and we decided that already. And I'll definitely,
Yes, we're looking at April 4th,
okay,
May 23rd. Both of those would start at 7 p.m. and June 13th, starting at 6
Okay.
p.m. All
okay,
in the- And also a hybrid.
great. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Natasha.
Natasha.
Did you say there's also an annual report for the green communities program that you're working on?
Yeah,
Is that something you can share at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. it's not a written report, it's much more an Excel-based, like, information down, just to give you a
Totally
heads
fine.
up.
Totally
Yeah.
fine. Just to see.
We don't see the benchmark.
Well, so that I think we're gonna need to figure out. You're gonna check with MEPC, so MEPC is doing the work to benchmark the municipality. You're gonna check to see what it would mean for them to add the rest of the residential and commercial properties, or let us know whether we're gonna have to figure out how to solve that another way. But if MEPC can do that as an add-on, that would be great. And I think they do have some tools to do
Yeah,
that.
they have some, and we've pulled some within Green Needham, we've pulled some different resources together. I'll try and track down what those are and where they came
I think that we can get the electrical from Eversource. I think we can get Eversource gas to get us the gas. Very difficult to track the oil. So I think they're just sort of their estimates based on addition. The town gets excise taxes on everything, vehicle. So I think it's possible to track how many vehicles of what age provides.
I think so. I mean, and we went through, it's not the excise tax, but we're part of the Solarize campaign. We pulled all the tax, the assessor's data on who uses what fuel and how many homes are oil needed, how many are propane, gas. And so there are ways to pull that data down.
It's an excellent way to include the high school climate action club.
So I would also imagine that some of the other towns have solved this problem. So I think maybe it's worth a phone call to a Wellesley or an Arlington and say, where are you getting that? And they might be able to. Okay. All right. Good. Any other questions for the first night? There's a big job ahead of us and the town is counting on us. That's what I'm going to say. So thank you to all of you for stepping up for the charge.
One very last thing, what do we want to do as far as communication to the community, as far as at points? I mean, I know
So-
there's minutes going on.
I don't think we need to talk that tonight.
Yeah,
We'll come back to that, but we're required to report to the select board at least a couple times a year. So we will be at the select board a couple times a year. We'll do more than that.
yeah.
Okay, but we're not ready yet.
No, we're not ready. At least we're talking about it. At least we're talking about it.
Will you be voting to adjourn or
Oh.
not?
How about you?
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
We're at.
All in
Oh,
favor?
nice. I wish I
Any opposed?
started doing that.
We are adjourned. Thank you, Kevin.
I started doing this undergrad.
Yeah.
I wish I would start.
After already left.
That's right.
Start young.
So when you drop that,
To be Eddie River City, congrats.
Oh.